Hey there! It's that time again. Sit back and relax as you immerse yourself into the story of The Isolation, a gut-wrenching thriller. Don't forget to like and subscribe to get new content every week if you enjoyed. And if you didn't like it, give us a thumbs down. Let us know. Chapter Fun Arrival. Emily Harris had always been drawn to the quiet, natural beauty of the mountains. As a child, she would spend hours gazing out at the peaks from her family's cabin, feeling a sense of peace and connection to the world around her. Now, as a successful psychologist in her late 20s, she'd returned to this tranquil landscape for a much-needed break from the chaos of her city life. Emily stood at the edge of the Mountain View Lodge parking lot, gazing out at the towering trees and majestic peaks beyond. She breathed in deeply, feeling the crisp mountain air fill her lungs, and smiled as Alex, her fiancé, wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Hey, ready to get married?" he whispered, nuzzling her ear. Emily playfully rolled her eyes, but couldn't help giggling at his teasing. "You know I'm still trying to decide if I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Alex chuckled and leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Promise to make it worth your while." The banter was familiar, comforting, a reminder that this trip was about more than just relaxation. It was about reconnecting as a couple. As they stepped out of the car, Emily's gaze drifted over the group of strangers already gathered near the lodge entrance. She spotted Jamie and her husband, Mike, laughing and taking selfies, while Dr. Patel stood slightly apart, sipping a cup of coffee and observing the commotion with an air of detached interest. Emily's eyes landed on Tom, the lodge owner, who was efficiently directing guests toward their rooms. He caught her eye and offered a warm smile, which Emily returned with ease. "Looks like we're in good hands," Alex said, following her gaze. Their room, nestled at the end of a rustic wooden hallway, was exactly what they'd been hoping for: cozy, secluded, and equipped with breathtaking views of the mountains. As they settled in, Emily couldn't help but feel grateful for this chance to escape, even if it meant being surrounded by strangers for a few days. "I'm so glad we did this," she said, snuggling into the plush blankets as Alex began unpacking their luggage. Alex grinned and handed her a steaming cup of coffee. "Me too. Now let's enjoy some peace and quiet before dinner." As they sipped their coffee on the balcony, Emily couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead for this small group. Would they find solace in each other's company? Or would the seclusion spark tensions that would ultimately threaten to tear them apart? The sound of laughter and conversation drifted from inside, mingling with the scent of pine needles and wood smoke carried on the breeze. For now, Emily was content to let the tranquility wash over her, but as she gazed out into the gathering darkness, a tiny voice whispered in the back of her mind, "Something's not quite right here." The banter was familiar, comforting, a reminder that this trip was about more than just relaxation. It was about reconnecting as a couple. As they stepped out of the car, Emily's gaze drifted over the group of strangers already gathered near the lodge entrance. She spotted Jamie and her husband, Mike, laughing and taking selfies, while Dr. Patel stood slightly apart, sipping a cup of coffee and observing the commotion with an air of detached interest. Emily's eyes landed on Tom, the lodge owner, who was efficiently directing guests toward their rooms. He caught her eye and offered a warm smile, which Emily returned with ease. "Looks like we're in good hands," Alex said, following her gaze. Their room, nestled at the end of a rustic wooden hallway, was exactly what they'd been hoping for: cozy, secluded, and equipped with breathtaking views of the mountains. As they settled in, Emily couldn't help but feel grateful for this chance to escape, even if it meant being surrounded by strangers for a few days. "I'm so glad we did this," she said, snuggling into the plush blankets as Alex began unpacking their luggage. Alex grinned and handed her a steaming cup of coffee. "Men too. Now let's enjoy some peace and quiet before dinner." As they sipped their coffee on the balcony, Emily couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead for this small group. Would they find solace in each other's company, or would the seclusion spark tensions that would ultimately threaten to tear them apart? The sound of laughter and conversation drift from inside, mingling with the scent of pine needles and wood smoke carried on the breeze. For now, Emily was content to let the tranquility wash over her, but as she gazed out into the gathering darkness, a tiny voice whispered in the back of her mind, "Something's not quite right here." As Emily and Alex made their way down to dinner, they were greeted by the sound of laughter and chatter from the group gathered in the lodge's main room. Tom, the owner, smiled warmly as he showed them to their table near the fireplace. "Welcome, welcome. Enjoy your meal, folks," he said, patting Emily on the back before moving off to attend to another guest. As they waited for their food to arrive, Emily and Alex took in the eclectic mix of guests. There was Jamie and Mike, a young couple beaming with excitement as they celebrated their honeymoon at the lodge. They were holding hands, giggling over something that had clearly made them both laugh out loud. Next to them sat Dr. Patel, a quiet, bespectacled man in his mid-50s who appeared to be sipping a cup of tea and observing the group with interest. He caught Emily's eye and smiled politely before returning to his book. Across from them was a lone figure, dressed in hiking gear, who seemed more interested in her phone than the scenery outside the windows. Emily wondered if she might be a solo traveler looking for adventure, or someone trying to escape something else entirely. Jamie and Mike, noticing their interest, waved enthusiastically and made their way over to introduce themselves. "Hey, we're Jamie and Mike," Jamie said, extending a hand to Alex while her husband shook hands with Emily. "We just got married last weekend." "What just got married last weekend?" Jamie continued, beaming with excitement. "And we're celebrating our honeymoon in this beautiful lodge." Mike chimed in. "Yeah, it's been a dream of ours to come here for years. And now that we've finally made it, we can't stop smiling." Emily and Alex exchanged warm congratulations, happy to share in the couple's joy. As they chatted with Jamie and Mike, Emily couldn't help but notice the way Patel watched them from across the room. He seemed interested, but also somehow detached, as if observing a fascinating experiment rather than genuine people. Dr. Patel cleared his throat and excused himself to answer a phone call. As he stepped away, Emily asked Jamie and Mike about their plans for the next few days. "We're thinking of exploring some of the nearby hiking trails," Jamie said. "The lodge has an amazing network of paths that take you through some of the most beautiful scenery I've ever seen." Mike nodded in agreement. "Yeah, we're both outdoor enthusiasts, so this is like a dream come true for us. We can't wait to get out there and hike our hearts out." Emily smiled, feeling a pang of envy. She and Alex had planned on doing some hiking too, but she wasn't sure if they'd have time with all the other activities on their agenda. Just then, Dr. Patel returned from his phone call and sat back down at his table, looking slightly distracted. Emily noticed that he was now staring intently at a small notebook on the table in front of him. "Excuse me," Dr. Patel said to Jamie and Mike. "I'm afraid I need to make a quick phone call." "Please don't mind me." But as he stepped away again, Emily felt a sudden sense of curiosity about Dr. Petal's presence at the lodge. Who was this man, and what brought him here? Jamie and Mike, still chatting enthusiastically, didn't seem to notice anything out of the ordinary. But as Emily glanced around the room, she noticed that several other guests were watching Dr. Patel with interest. Tom, the lodge owner, caught her eye and nodded discreetly towards Dr. Patel's table. "Be nice to him," he mouthed silently. Emily raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What was going on here? As dinner arrived, Emily and Alex dug in, enjoying the delicious meal while trying to make conversation with Jamie and Mike. but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about Dr. Patel's behavior. Later that evening, as they were sipping coffee by the fireplace, Emily decided to ask Tom directly what was going on. "Hey, Tom," she said, nudging him gently with her elbow. "I couldn't help but notice, is everything okay with Dr. Patel, I mean?" Tom leaned in closer, a hint of caution in his voice. Yes, Dr. Patel. Well, let's just say he's not exactly on vacation." Emily raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Tom glanced around the room, ensuring they were out of earshot from the other guests. "He's a researcher," Tom explained quietly. "From a university back east. He's been conducting studies on the effects of isolation and confinement on the human psyche." Emily's eyes widened in surprise. "That sounds fascinating, but why here?" Tom leaned in closer still, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because this lodge is unique. The location, the design, it's all carefully crafted to create an atmosphere of complete seclusion. Dr. Patel's been using it as a sort of natural laboratory for his research." Alex's eyes had lit up with interest, and he spoke up before Emily could ask any more questions. "That sounds incredible. Can we see some of the research? Maybe learn more about what he's studying?" Tom smiled wryly. "I'm afraid Dr. Patel is a bit protective of his work, but I can introduce you to him if you'd like." As Tom made the introduction, Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. She had a feeling that Dr. Patel's research was far more sinister than she had initially thought. Dr. Patel greeted them warmly, but his eyes seemed to bore into their souls as he asked about their interests and backgrounds. Emily couldn't shake the sense that he was probing for something specific. "What do you think of the lodge?" Dr. Patel asked, his voice friendly but with an undercurrent of intensity. "It's beautiful," Emily said hesitantly. "But I have to ask, what exactly are you researching here?" Dr. Patel leaned in closer, a small smile playing on his lips. "I'm studying human behavior in isolation," he replied. "The effects of prolonged confinement on the mind and body." As he spoke, Emily noticed something strange. Dr. Patel seemed to be watching her, studying her every reaction with an unnerving intensity. Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered, and a low hum filled the air. It was as if the lodge itself had come alive, echoing the sinister undercurrents that lurked beneath its tranquil surface. And then everything went black. Chapter 2. The darkness, the sudden blackout was jarring, and Emily's heart skipped a beat as she struggled to regain her bearings. She felt Alex's hand grasp hers, and Jamie and Mike were scrambling out of their seats, concerned. "What's going on?" Jamie asked Tom, who was frowning as he checked the lights. "I don't know," Tom admitted, "but I'll get it sorted out, bot." As they waited for the power to come back on, Emily felt a creeping sense of unease. It wasn't just the darkness that unsettled her, it was the feeling that something was off, like a thread had been pulled loose in the fabric of reality. The lights flickered back to life, and the room was bathed in an eerie glow. Emily's gaze fell on Dr. Patel, who was sitting calmly in his chair, his eyes fixed intently on her. "Ah," he said, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. "I think we were just experiencing a minor, technical difficulty." Emily exchanged a skeptical glance with Alex, but before she could ask any questions, Dr. Patel stood up and began to pace around the room. "I'm afraid I've been working on a rather sensitive project," he explained, his words dripping with an air of studied casualness. "One that requires a certain level of secrecy." Jamie and Mike exchanged a curious glance, but Emily's unease had grown. There was something about Dr. Patel's words that didn't quite add up. As the evening wore on, Emily found herself growing increasingly withdrawn. The atmosphere in the room seemed to be shifting, like the pieces were being rearranged into some new, unsettling configuration. And then, just as she thought things couldn't get any stranger, a knock at the door made everyone jump. Tom stood up to answer it, but as he did, Emily caught sight of something that made her blood run cold. The lone figure in hiking gear from earlier was standing outside the room, her eyes fixed on Dr. Patel with an unnerving intensity. And then she spoke. "Dr. Patel," she said, her voice low and menacing. "I've been waiting for you." The room fell silent as the stranger's words hung in the air like a challenge. Emily's eyes locked onto Dr. Patel, who seemed to be frozen in place, his eyes fixed on the woman. "Ah," he said finally, his voice dripping with a sense of unease. "Samantha, I didn't expect you to... track me down here." The stranger's gaze flicked to Emily and Alex, then Jamie and Mike, before coming back to rest on Dr. Patel. Her eyes seemed to bore into him, as if searching for something hidden. "I've been tracking you for weeks," she said, her voice low and even. "I know all about your little project." Dr. Patel's face went pale, and he took a step back from the woman. "Samantha, please. You don't understand." But Samantha didn't let him finish. She stepped into the room, her eyes flashing with a fierce intensity. "I understand perfectly," she spat. "You're playing God, Patel. You're tampering with things you don't even begin to comprehend." As the stranger's words spilled out, Emily felt a chill run down her spine. There was something about Samantha's tone that sent shivers through her veins. And then it hit her, a sudden realization that made her blood run cold. Samantha wasn't just any stranger. She was someone who knew Dr. Patel, and she was here for a reason that had nothing to do with the lodge or its occupants. It was then that Emily remembered the look on Samantha's face as she stood outside the room, watching Dr. Patel like a hawk. A look of anger? Yes. But also something else, something that looked disturbingly like fear. What is it about her? Emily asked herself, but before she could ask anyone else, the lights in the room flickered once more and died. The darkness was absolute this time, and Emily felt a scream building up inside her. She knew they were all trapped in some kind of nightmare from which there was no escape. As she struggled to breathe, she heard Samantha's voice whisper through the darkness. "You can't hide forever, Patel. Not even here." The sudden darkness seemed to last an eternity, and Emily's heart was racing with fear. She felt Alex's hand grasp hers again, and Jamie and Mike were murmuring anxiously in the darkness. But as she waited for the lights to come back on, Emily realized that something was off. The silence in the room was oppressive, and she could sense a presence lurking just out of sight. And then, without warning, the lights flickered back to life. The room was bathed in an eerie glow once more, but this time it seemed different. The air felt charged with tension, as if the darkness had left behind a residue of unease. Samantha's eyes locked onto Dr. Patel, and her face twisted into a snarl. "You think you can hide from me?" she spat. "You think you can keep your little secret safe?" Dr. Patel took a step back, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. "Samantha, please. I don't know what you're talking about." But Samantha wasn't listening. She was advancing on Dr. Patel, her movements fluid and menacing. "Tell me," she hissed, her voice low and deadly. "What have you done this time?" As the confrontation escalated, Emily felt a growing sense of dread. What secrets was Dr. Patel hiding? And what had Samantha uncovered that made her so angry? But before she could piece together the truth, Jamie spoke up from the shadows. "Wait," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "What's going on here?" Samantha's gaze flicked to Jamie, and for a moment Emily thought she saw something like recognition. But then Samantha's face twisted again, and she spat at Jamie's feet. "You don't want to know," she said. "You don't want to be involved." But it was too late. The truth was already out, and the consequences would be catastrophic. As the room erupted into chaos, Emily realized that they were all trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape, and at the center of it all was Dr. Patel, with his secrets and his lies. What had he done to Samantha? and what lay hidden in the darkness, waiting to pounce. Emily's eyes scanned the room frantically as she searched for answers, but they seemed to be vanishing into thin air. As the chaos erupted, Emily felt a sense of panic rising up inside her. What was going on? What secrets was Dr. Patel hiding? Jamie stood up, his eyes fixed on Samantha, and tried to intervene. "Listen, we don't know what's going on here," he said, trying to reason with her. "But let's just calm down and talk about it." But Samantha wasn't having it. She was too far gone, fueled by anger and desperation. "No one understands," she shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Dr. Patel. "No one knows what you've done." As the argument escalated, Emily realized that something was terribly wrong. Dr. Patel's eyes seemed to be darting around the room, searching for an escape route. And when he spoke, his voice was laced with fear. "Samantha," he said, trying to reason with her. "Please, you don't understand. I had no choice." Samantha's face twisted in a snarl. "You always have a choice," she spat, "and you chose to experiment on us. On all of us." As the truth began to unravel, Emily felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. Experiment? What did Samantha mean? Suddenly, it clicked into place. The lodge was a research facility. Patel had been conducting experiments on them, using them as test subjects. The memories flooded back, the strange procedures, the endless testing, the feeling of being trapped and helpless. Emily's mind reeled as she struggled to process the truth. They were all victims of Dr. Patel's twisted research. But what about Samantha? What had happened to her? Samantha's eyes seemed to bore into Emily's soul, and for a moment, Emily saw something like recognition there, something like understanding. "You too," Samantha said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't remember, do you?" As the room fell silent, Emily felt a chill run down her spine. What did Samantha mean? What memories were hidden deep within her mind? The answer was shrouded in darkness, waiting to be uncovered. But as she looked around at the others, Emily knew that they were all in this together. They had to get out of there, and fast, before Dr. Patel's secrets consumed them all. As Samantha's words hung in the air, Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. What did she mean? That Emily didn't remember something. But before she could ask any questions, Jamie spoke up. "Samantha, what are you talking about?" he asked, his voice firm but curious. Samantha's eyes flicked to Jamie, and for a moment, Emily saw a glimmer of something like sadness there. But then Samantha's face twisted in anger again. "You don't remember," she spat. "You think you're so lucky, don't you? You think you've escaped." Suddenly memories began to flood back into Emily's mind. Memories that were hidden deep within her subconscious. She remembered the lab, the cold steel table, the feeling of being helpless and trapped. She remembered Dr. Patel's voice, his words dripping with condescension as he spoke about the experiment. And then she remembered Samantha. Samantha was a fellow test subject, one who had been subjected to the same procedures as Emily. But something had gone wrong during the experiment. Something that had left Samantha different. Emily's mind reeled as she struggled to process the memories. She had thought she'd forgotten everything, but now it all came flooding back. "What happened?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Samantha's eyes seemed to bore into hers, and for a moment, Emily saw something like recognition there. "You were part of the experiment," Samantha said. "You don't remember because Dr. Patel erased your memories." As the truth sank in, Emily felt a wave of nausea wash over her. They had been subjected to some kind of mind control technique, something that had wiped out their memories and left them with nothing but fragments. But why? What was Dr. Patel's ultimate goal? The question swirled in Emily's mind as she looked around at the others. Jamie, Mike, Alex, they all seemed to be trapped in the same web of secrets and lies. "We have to get out of here," Emily said, her voice firm. "We can't stay here any longer." But as they turned to leave, Emily realized that it wasn't going to be easy. Patel had set up a network of surveillance cameras and guards around the facility. And there was something else. Something that made Emily's heart skip a beat. "What is it?" Jamie asked, noticing the fear in her eyes. "It's the exit," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's trapped." As they turned to face the exit, Emily saw that it was sealed off by a metal grill, and on the other side of the door, a sign read, "Classified experiment. Do not enter." Emily's heart sank as she realized the truth. They were trapped, and Dr. Patel's secrets were more sinister than they could have ever imagined. As Emily and her friends stared at the sealed exit, a sense of panic began to set in. They had to get out of there, but how? Jamie took charge, his mind racing with possibilities. "We need to find another way out," he said, scanning the room for any possible exits. "There has to be another door, or a window." But as they searched, Emily couldn't shake off the feeling that they were being watched. She kept looking over her shoulder, expecting to see Dr. Patel's face peering back at her. And then she saw it. A small ventilation shaft in the wall, partially hidden by a tattered curtain. "That's our way out," Emily said, pointing to the vent. "We can climb through there and escape." But as they approached the vent, they realized that it was locked. Dr. Patel had anticipated their plan and secured every possible exit. Mike tried to force the lock open, but it wouldn't budge. They were trapped. "We need to find another way," Jamie said, his voice calm despite the growing panic. "There to be a weakness in this place." As they continued to search for an alternative escape route, Emily stumbled upon a hidden logbook belonging to one of Dr. Patel's former assistants. The pages were filled with cryptic notes and warnings about the experiments. Subject shows signs of regression, memory loss accelerated by 50%. Subject begins to exhibit anomalous behavior. The words sent shivers down Emily's spine as she realized that they had all been subjected to some kind of mind control technique. Dr. Patel was playing God, manipulating their memories and altering their behavior. But there was something else in the logbook, a hidden message encoded in a series of seemingly random symbols. Emily's eyes widened as she recognized the code. It was an old encryption method used by the government to conceal sensitive information. "What is it?" Jamie asked, noticing her interest. "It's a password," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It unlocks the mainframe computer." With newfound hope, they made their way back to the main room and located the computer terminal. The password worked, granting them access to Dr. Patel's secret files. But what they found was more than just a collection of documents. It was evidence of a sinister plot, one that threatened to destroy everything they thought they knew about themselves. "We have to get out of here," Emily said, her voice trembling with fear. "No." As they made their way back to the vent, the sound of footsteps echoed through the corridors, growing louder by the second. Dr. Patel had discovered their plan, and he was coming for them. The sound of Dr. Patel's footsteps grew louder, his voice echoing off the walls as he shouted for security to bring in the guards. "We have to move now," Jamie yelled, grabbing Emily's arm and pulling her towards the vent. They scrambled up the ladder, their hearts pounding in unison with the sound of Dr. Patel's rage. Mike and Alex followed close behind, their eyes fixed on the narrow opening above them. As they emerged into the ductwork, Emily felt a sense of relief wash over her. They had made it out alive for now. But as she looked back at the vent, she saw Dr. Patel's face contorted with fury, his eyes blazing with a madness that sent shivers down her spine. "We can't stay here," Jamie said, his voice low and urgent. "We have to keep moving." They crawled deeper into the ductwork, their bodies squeezed tight as they navigated the narrow passages. The air was thick with dust and the stench of mold. But Emily barely noticed. She was too busy listening for the sound of pursuit. It didn't take long to find out if Dr. Patel had given up on catching them. The sound of guards shouting and footsteps pounding through the ductwork told a different story. "We have to keep going," Mike said, his voice muffled by the dust. As they crawled deeper into the facility, Emily began to notice something strange. The ductwork seemed to be leading them towards an unknown destination, one that didn't seem to make sense for a research facility. "Where are we going?" Alex asked, her voice laced with uncertainty. "I don't know," Jamie replied, "but I think it's not what Dr. Paddle wants us to see." Emily's heart skipped a beat as she realized the truth. They were being led into a trap, one that would give them the chance to escape, but also put their lives in greater danger than ever before. As they rounded a corner, Emily saw something that made her blood run cold. A door marked, "Authorized personnel only," swung open, revealing a dimly lit room filled with rows of computer servers and humming machinery. "What is this place?" Mike asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Jamie replied, "but I think we're about to find out." But as they crawled closer to the door, Emily saw something that made her heart sink. A group of shadowy figures huddled around a bank of monitors, their eyes fixed on a single screen displaying a message that chilled her to the bone. "Escape protocols initiated. Prepare for extraction." As Emily and her friends watched in horror, the shadowy figures began to move towards them, their faces obscured by shadows. "What's going on?" Alex asked, her voice trembling with fear. "I don't know," Jamie replied, "but I think we're about to find out." The figures surrounded them, their eyes fixed on Emily and her friends. One of them stepped forward, a tall figure with a cold, calculating gaze. "Welcome, subjects," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. We've been expecting you." Emily felt a chill run down her spine as she realized that these people were not here to help them escape. They were here for some other purpose, one that she couldn't quite understand. "What do you want from us?" Mike asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The figure smiled, a cold, calculating smile. "We want what Dr. Patel wants," he said, "and we're willing to do whatever it takes to get it." As Emily watched in horror, the figure reached out and grabbed her arm, pulling her towards the bank of monitors. "Look," he said, gesturing to the screens. "You see this?" On the screens, a message flashed. "Escape protocols initiated. Prepare for extraction." "What does it mean?" Alex asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It means you're being extracted from the facility," the figure replied. "Duh. Patel has deemed you ready for the next phase of the experiment." Emily felt a wave of fear wash over her as she realized what was happening. They were not being rescued. They were being taken to some other destination, one that was far more sinister than anything they could have imagined. As the figure continued to speak, Emily's mind reeled with questions. What did Dr. Patel want from them? What was this next phase of the experiment? And what lay ahead for her and her friends? But before she could ask any of these questions, everything went black. When Emily came to, she found herself in a small, dimly lit room. She was lying on a bed, surrounded by monitors and strange equipment. "Where am I?" she asked, trying to sit up. A figure emerged from the shadows, Dr. Patel himself. "Welcome back," he said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "You're about to embark on the next phase of the experiment." While Emily felt a wave of fear wash over her as she realized what was happening. She was trapped in some kind of facility, subject to the whims of a mad scientist who wanted to use her for his own twisted purposes. And she knew that she had to escape before it was too late. Chapter 3: The Experiment. Dr. Patel's eyes gleamed with excitement as he began to explain the next phase of the experiment. "You see, Emily," he said, his voice dripping with enthusiasm, "you and your friends have shown great potential for adaptation and learning. We've been monitoring your brain activity, and we believe that you're ready for the next level." Emily's mind reeled as she tried to understand what was happening. What did Dr. Patel mean by adaptation? and learning. And what exactly did he plan to do with her? "What are you going to do to me?" Emily asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Dr. Patel chuckled, his eyes glinting with amusement. "Oh, don't worry," he said. "We'll just be enhancing your cognitive abilities. You'll become smarter, faster, and more agile than ever before." While Emily's heart sank as she realized what Dr. Patel was proposing. He wanted to experiment on her brain, using some kind of technology or procedure that would enhance her abilities. But at what cost? As Dr. Patel began to explain the details of the procedure, Emily felt a wave of horror wash over her. She knew that she had to escape, and fast. "Wait," Jamie said, his voice firm. "We're not going to let you do this. We won't be your test subjects." Dr. Patel's face fell, his expression changing from excitement to annoyance. "I'm afraid it's too late for that," he said, his voice cold. "The procedure has already begun. You'll see the results soon enough." As Dr. Patel stepped back, a team of technicians rushed into the room, carrying strange equipment and machines. Emily watched in horror as they began to attach wires and sensors to her head, preparing her for the experiment. She knew that she had to escape, but how? The technicians worked quickly and efficiently, attaching wires and sensors to Emily's head. She felt a sense of panic rising up inside her as she realized what was happening. "No," Jamie said, trying to push his way through the crowd. "You can't do this." Dr. Patel stepped forward, his eyes flashing with anger. "I'm afraid it's too late for that," he said. "The procedure has already begun. You'll see the results soon enough." As Emily watched in horror, a large machine began to hum behind her. The technicians attached wires to her head and connected them to the machine. "What is this thing?" Mike asked, his voice shaking with fear. "It's a neural stimulator," Dr. Patel replied. "It will enhance your cognitive abilities and increase your intelligence." Emily felt a sense of dread wash over her as she realized what was happening. She was being subjected to some kind of experiment, one that would change her forever. The machine hummed to life, and Emily felt a surge of electricity run through her body. She tried to move, but her muscles were paralyzed by the machines attached to her head. As the minutes ticked by, Emily felt herself slipping into a strange, dreamlike state. She saw visions of the past and present, images that flashed through her mind like a fast-paced movie. She saw her parents smiling and happy. She saw her friends laughing and joking around. And she saw Dr. Patel, his eyes gleaming with excitement as he watched her being experimented on. The machine hummed louder, and Emily felt herself being pulled deeper into the dreamlike state. She was aware of her body, but it seemed distant, as if it belonged to someone else. As she floated through the visions, Emily realized that something was happening inside her head. The neural stimulator was working its magic, enhancing her cognitive abilities and increasing her intelligence. But at what cost? When Emily finally came to, she found herself lying on a bed in a small room. She was alone with no sign of Jamie or Mike. As she sat up and looked around, Emily realized that something was different. Her thoughts were clearer, her mind sharper. She felt more focused, more alert. And then it hit her, the memories. Emily's past flooded back into her mind, every detail vivid and clear. She remembered her childhood, her parents, her friends. But there was something else, a new memory, one that wasn't hers. Emily saw herself in a laboratory, surrounded by machines and technicians. She saw Dr. Patel, his eyes gleaming with excitement as he watched her being experimented on. And she knew the truth. She had been changed, altered by the neural stimulator to become something more. But what did it mean? And what was the cost of this newfound intelligence? As Emily sat in stunned silence, she realized that she had to escape. She had to get out of the laboratory and find Jamie and Mike before Dr. Tell and his team could use her for their next experiment. But how? Emily's mind reeled as she tried to process what had happened. She was no longer the same person. Her memories were still there, but they were enhanced, more vivid and detailed than before. And then there was the new memory, one that wasn't hers. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine as she realized that Dr. Tell had been experimenting on her without her consent. She tried to stand up, but her legs felt weak and unsteady. The neural stimulator must have left some kind of after effect, Emily thought. As she struggled to find her balance, Emily heard a noise behind her. She turned to see Jamie entering the room, his eyes scanning the space frantically. "Emily," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you okay?" Emily nodded, still trying to process what had happened. "What about Mike?" she asked, her voice shaking with fear. Jamie's face fell and Emily knew that something was wrong. "I don't know," Jamie replied. "I couldn't find him anywhere. But we have to get out of here. Now." Emily nodded in agreement. She knew that they had to escape before Dr. Patel could use them for his next experiment. But as they turned to leave, Emily felt a strange sensation wash over her. Her senses were heightened, her reflexes faster than before. She looked at Jamie and saw him with new eyes, his strengths and weaknesses, his fears and motivations. "Jamie," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can see you now." Jamie's eyes widened in shock as Emily continued to describe what she was seeing. "You're thinking of escaping," Emily said, her mind racing ahead. "You're planning to take down Patel and his team. But there's something holding you back, something that makes you afraid to act." Jamie's face fell, and Emily knew that she had hit the nail on the head. "What is it?" Emily asked, her voice filled with compassion. Jamie hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. "It's my sister," he said finally. "She was one of the first subjects in Dr. Patel's experiment. She didn't make it." Emily nodded, understanding dawning on her face. "I'm sorry," she said, "but we have to keep moving. We can't let Dr. Patel use us for his next experiment." Jamie nodded, a fierce determination burning in his eyes. "Let's do this," he said. Together, Emily and Jamie set out to escape the laboratory, with new powers and newfound understanding of themselves and each other. But as they moved through the corridors, avoiding Dr. Patel's guards and making their way towards freedom, Emily couldn't shake off the feeling that something was waiting for them around the corner. Something that would change everything. As they navigated through the laboratory, Emily and Jamie encountered several guards, but with their newfound powers, they were able to evade capture easily. "Whoa, Emily," Jamie said as they stopped to catch their breath in a deserted corridor. "I've never seen anyone adapt so quickly to this new whatever it is." Emily smiled, feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment. "I think it's because we're working together," she said. "Our minds are connected now." Jamie nodded, his eyes scanning the area cautiously. "We need to keep moving," he said. "We can't let Patel catch us again." Just then, Emily heard a faint noise coming from one of the rooms they had passed earlier. "What was that?" Jamie asked, his head cocked to one side. Emily frowned, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. "I don't know," she said. "But I think we should check it out." Jamie nodded, and together they crept back towards the room where the noise had originated. As they entered the room, Emily was shocked by what she saw. Mike was lying on a bed, surrounded by machines and wires. "Mike!" Emily exclaimed, rushing to his side. But as she looked closer, she realized that something was wrong. Mike's eyes were open, but they seemed different. "Mike?" Jamie asked, his voice tentative. "Can you hear me?" Mike's eyes flickered towards them, but he didn't respond. He just lay there, his body still and unresponsive. "What have they done to him?" Emily whispered, feeling a wave of horror wash over her. Jamie shook his head, his face grim. "I don't know," he said. "But we need to get out of here now." As they turned to leave, Emily noticed something else on the bed, a small note scribbled in Mike's handwriting. "What is it?" Jamie asked, seeing the look on Emily's face. Emily picked up the note and read it, her eyes scanning the words frantically. "It's a message from Mike," she said finally. "He's been trying to tell us something." Jamie's eyes narrowed as he took the note from Emily. "What does it say?" he asked. Emily hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. "It says that Patel has been experimenting on more than just our minds," she said slowly. "He's been playing with our memories too." Jamie's face fell, and Emily knew that they were in even deeper trouble than they thought. "We need to get out of here fast," Jamie said, his voice firm. But as they turned to leave, Emily felt a strange sensation wash over her. Her mind was racing ahead, seeing possibilities and outcomes that hadn't occurred to her before. And suddenly, she knew what Mike had been trying to tell them all along. "You don't understand what's going on," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dr. Patel isn't just experimenting on us. He's trying to create something new, something that will change the world forever." But Jamie's eyes widened in shock as Emily revealed her newfound understanding. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily took a deep breath, trying to process what she had seen. "I think Dr. Patel is trying to merge our minds," she said slowly. "He wants to create a collective consciousness, one that will be greater than the sum of its parts." Jamie's face fell as he realized the implications. "That means he's planning to delete individual identities," he said, his voice filled with horror. "He's going to erase who we are and make us into something else." Emily nodded, feeling a sense of dread wash over her. "But why?" Jamie asked, his eyes scanning the room frantically. "What's the purpose of this collective consciousness?" Emily hesitated, unsure of what to say. "I think it's because Dr. Patel believes that we're on the brink of chaos," she said finally. "He thinks that our individual identities are the cause of all our problems, that if we were one mind working together, we'd be able to solve any issue that came our way." Jamie shook his head, his eyes filled with skepticism. "But at what cost?" he asked. "What will happen to us, to who we are?" Emily felt a pang of sadness as she realized the truth. "We'll lose ourselves," she said softly. "We'll become something else. Something that's not human anymore." The two friends stood there in silence for a moment, trying to process what they had learned. But then, Emily heard a faint noise coming from outside the room. "What is it?" Jamie asked, his head cocked to one side. Emily frowned, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. "I think it's Dr. Patel," she said finally. He's coming for us." As they spoke, the door burst open and Dr. Patel strode into the room, a look of triumph on his face. "Ah, excellent," he exclaimed. "I see you've discovered my plan. But don't worry, it's not too late to join me in this revolution. Together, we can create something truly remarkable." Emily and Jamie exchanged a nervous glance, unsure of what to do next. But as they looked at each other, Emily knew that she had made up her mind. "No," she said firmly, standing up straight. "We won't let you do it. We'll fight against this collective consciousness, no matter the cost." Dr. Patel's face fell as he realized his mistake. "You're just not seeing the bigger picture," he said, trying to reason with them. But Emily shook her head, her eyes blazing with determination. "We see exactly what we need to do," she said. "We'll stop you no matter what it takes." And with that, the battle for their minds began. Patel's face twisted in anger as he realized that Emily and Jamie were refusing to cooperate. "Foolish children," he spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "You don't understand the genius of what I'm trying to create. You're just too narrow-minded to see the possibilities." Emily stood her ground, despite feeling a surge of fear at Dr. Patel's venomous tone. "We'll never agree to be part of your collective consciousness," she said firmly. "We value our individuality and freedom too much." Dr. Patel sneered at them, his eyes glinting with amusement. "Freedom," he repeated. "Ha! You have no idea what true freedom is. But I'll give you a choice to join me now, or face the consequences of resisting my plan. Jamie stepped forward, his fists clenched. We'll never give in, he said, his voice steady. We'll fight against this collective consciousness with every breath in our bodies. Dr. Patel shrugged, unfazed by their defiance. Very well, he said. But first, let me show you the true potential of my creation. With a flick of his wrist, the lights in the room began to flicker and dim. The air seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy as Dr. Patel raised his hands to the ceiling. Suddenly, images began to flash on the walls around them, visions of cities teeming with life, of people working together in harmony, of a world where conflict and war were a thing of the past. Emily felt her mind reel as she tried to take it all in. This was what Dr. Patel had been trying to create, a utopia. But at what cost? As she looked around at Jamie, she saw that he was equally stunned, his eyes wide with wonder. Dr. Patel smiled, his eyes glinting with triumph. Welcome to the future, he said. A future where we're all one mind, working together in perfect harmony. Emily shook her head, trying to clear the haze of visions from her mind. This isn't a utopia, she said firmly. This is a prison of conformity and control. Dr. Patel's smile faltered for a moment, but then he regained his composure. You're just not seeing the bigger picture, he repeated. But I'll give you one more chance to join me. Refuse again, and consequences will be severe. Emily hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do next. But then she looked at Jamie, saw the determination in his eyes, and knew that they were in this together. We refuse, she said firmly. Dr. Patel's face twisted with rage as he realized that Emily and Jamie had made their choice. Very well, he spat. Then you'll have to face the consequences of resisting my plan. And with that, everything went black. Chapter 40. The consequences. Emily's eyes fluttered open to find herself in a cold, dark room. She was lying on a narrow bed, surrounded by blank walls and a single flickering light bulb. Jamie, she whispered, sitting up and looking around frantically. Where's Jamie? But there was no answer. As she tried to stand up, Emily felt a searing pain shoot through her head. She stumbled and fell back onto the bed, gasping in shock. What have you done to me? She cried out, trying to remember what had happened before. Suddenly, memories came flooding back. Duller. Patel's plan for collective consciousness, Jamie's defiance, their refusal to join. Emily scrambled off the bed, determined to find Jamie and escape. But as she stumbled towards the door, she was confronted by a figure in a white lab coat. Emily, Dr. Patel said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. I see you're awake. Good. Emily glared at him, her eyes blazing with anger. What have you done to me? She repeated. Dr. Patel shrugged. Just a little something I like to call temporal displacement, he said. It's a technique that allows us to manipulate time and space. And it just so happens that your memory of the past few hours has been altered. Emily's mind reeled as Dr. Tell began to explain his plan in more detail. You see, Emily, you've been experiencing strange visions and memories for weeks now, he said. But I think we both know what's really going on. You're not just seeing the future, you're changing it. As Dr. Patel spoke, Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. Was she truly altering the course of events? And if so, how? Just then, Jamie burst into the room, his eyes wild with fear. Emily, he exclaimed, rushing to her side. I was starting to think I'd never find you. But Dr. Patel just smiled and shook his head. I'm afraid it's too late for that, he said. You see, Emily has been experiencing temporal displacement, and so have you, Jamie. Jamie's eyes widened in horror as the truth dawned on him. What does that mean? He whispered. Dr. Patel leaned forward, a cruel glint in his eye. It means that your memories are not your own, he said. They're just fragments of a reality that doesn't exist yet. And if we don't do something about it, the consequences will be catastrophic. As Dr. Tell spoke, Emily felt her world spinning out of control. Was she trapped in some kind of time loop? And what did Dr. Patel plan to do next? Only one thing was certain: Emily and Jamie had to escape before it was too late. Dr. Patel's words hung in the air like a challenge, leaving Emily and Jamie staring at each other in confusion. "What do you mean?" Emily asked, trying to process what was happening. "How can our memories not be our own?" Dr. Patel leaned back in his chair, a self-satisfied smile spreading across his face. "Time travel is a complex thing," he said. "But essentially, it means that every time we make a decision or take an action, we create a new branch of reality. And with temporal displacement, well, let's just say you two have been experiencing some of those branches firsthand." Jamie shook his head, trying to clear the cobwebs. "But what does this have to do with us?" he asked. Dr. Patel leaned forward again, his eyes glinting with intensity. "Because, my dear friends," he said, "your memories are not just fragments of a reality that doesn't exist yet. They're also warnings." Emily and Jamie exchanged a skeptical look. "What do you mean?" Emily asked. Dr. Patel's smile grew wider. "I mean that every time you've made a decision or taken an action in the past few weeks, it's created a new branch of reality," he said. "And some of those branches, well, let's just say they're not exactly pleasant." Jamie's eyes went wide as understanding dawned on him. "You're saying that our memories are trying to tell us something?" he asked. Dr. Patel nodded. "That's right," he said. "Your memories are trying to warn you away from certain paths, certain decisions. Because if you don't listen, well, the consequences could be catastrophic." Emily felt a chill run down her spine as she thought about the implications of what Dr. Patel was saying. "What kind of consequences?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Duh." Patel's smile grew wider still. "The kind that will change everything," he said. "The kind that will make you question everything you thought you knew about reality." As Dr. Patel spoke, Emily felt a sense of unease growing inside her. What had they stumbled into? And how could they possibly escape the consequences? Just then, the door to the room burst open and a figure strode in. "Dr. Patel," the figure said, "we have a problem." "Drag." Patel's eyes flicked towards the newcomer, his expression unreadable. "What is it?" he asked. The newcomer hesitated before speaking. "It seems that Emily and Jamie's temporal displacement has caused a rift," she said. Emily's eyes went wide as she stared at Dr. Patel. "A rift in what?" she asked. Dr. Patel's smile grew even wider still. "A rift in time itself," he said. As the words hung in the air, Emily felt her world spinning out of control once more. What did it mean? And how could they possibly fix it? Only one thing was certain: Emily and Jamie were running out of time. Dr. Patel's words hung in the air like a warning, leaving Emily and Jamie staring at each other in horror. "A rift in time itself," Emily repeated, trying to process what she was hearing. "What does that mean?" Dr. Patel leaned back in his chair, a self-satisfied smile still spreading across his face. "It means that the fabric of reality is beginning to unravel," he said. "And if we don't do something about it, well, let's just say the consequences will be catastrophic." Jamie shook his head, trying to clear the cobwebs. "But what does this have to do with us?" he asked again. Dr. Patel leaned forward once more, his eyes glinting with intensity. "You two are the key to fixing the rift," he said. "Your memories, your experiences, they're all connected to the event that caused the rift in the first place." Emily's mind was racing as she tried to piece together what Dr. Patel was saying. "What event?" she asked. Dr. Patel's smile grew wider still. "The event that will change everything," he said. "The event that will make you question everything you thought you knew about reality." As Dr. Patel spoke, the room around them began to fade away, replaced by a vision of a desolate landscape stretching out as far as the eye could see. "What's happening?" Jamie asked, his voice shaking with fear. Dr. Patel's eyes were still fixed on Emily and Jamie, his expression unreadable. The rift is opening, he said. And if we don't stop it, well, let's just say it will be too late. Emily felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the gravity of their situation. We have to stop it, she said, her voice firm. We can't let it happen. Dr. Petal nodded, his smile growing even wider still. I knew you'd see things my way, he said. Now, let's get to work. We have a lot to do if we're going to fix the rift and save reality itself. As Dr. Petal spoke, the vision around them began to fade away, replaced by the familiar walls of the laboratory. Emily and Jamie exchanged a look, their hearts pounding with fear. What just happened? Jamie asked, his voice shaking. Emily's eyes were fixed on Drera. Patel, her expression unreadable. I think we just became the key to saving reality, she said. As the words hung in the air, Emily felt a sense of determination growing inside her. They would stop the rift, no matter what it took. But as they turned to face Dr. Patel, they realized that they were not alone. A figure stood in the shadows, watching them with an intensity that made Emily's skin crawl. Who are you? Jamie asked, his voice firm. The figure stepped forward, revealing a woman with piercing green eyes and long, curly hair. My name is Sarah, she said, and I'm here to help. But Emily's eyes narrowed as she stared at Sarah. Why should we trust you? She asked. Sarah smiled, her eyes glinting with amusement. Because I have information that will change everything, she said. Information about the event that caused the rift, and about Dr. Patel's true intentions. Emily's eyes narrowed as she stared at Sarah, her mind racing with questions. What do you mean? Emily asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Sarah stepped forward, a confident smile spreading across her face. I mean that I know the truth about Dr. Patel's plan, she said, and I'm here to help you stop it. Jamie's eyes went wide as he stared at Sarah in amazement. How do we know we can trust you? Jamie asked, his voice skeptical. Sarah laughed, a low, husky sound that sent shivers down Emily's spine. You don't, she said. But I'm willing to take that risk if it means stopping Dr. Patel and saving the world. Dr. Patel's face darkened as he listened to Sarah's words, his eyes flashing with anger. Enough of this nonsense, he snapped, striding forward. You're just trying to distract us from our mission, but I won't let you succeed. Sarah smiled sweetly at Dr. Patel, her eyes glinting with amusement. Oh, I'm not here to distract you, she said. I'm here to help, and I have information that will prove it. But Emily's curiosity was piqued as Sarah rummaged through her bag and produced a small device. What is that? Emily asked, eyeing the device warily. Sarah smiled. It's a temporal accelerator, she said. And with this, we can speed up time itself and prevent the rift from opening. Jamie's eyes went wide as he stared at Sarah in amazement. How does it work? Jamie asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah explained the device's workings, her words flowing like a river as she spoke. Emily listened intently, her mind racing with questions. But what about Dr. Patel's plan? Emily asked, trying to keep up with Sarah's rapid-fire explanation. Sarah smiled. Don't worry, she said. I have a plan for that too. Dr. Patel snorted in disgust, his face darkening with anger. You're just going to sit back and let us do the hard work. He sneered at Sarah. Sarah shrugged. I'm not here to do your job, Dr. Patel, she said. But I am willing to help, and if you're too proud to accept my offer, well, that's your choice. The air was electric with tension as Emily and Jamie exchanged a look. Could they trust Sarah? Or was this just another trick? As the debate raged on, Emily felt a sudden jolt of electricity run through her body. What's happening? She asked, feeling a strange sensation coursing through her veins. Sarah's eyes flickered to Emily, a worried expression crossing her face. The rift is opening, Sarah said. We don't have much time. Emily's heart was racing as she stared at the device in Sarah's hand. We have to do something now, Emily said, her voice urgent. Sarah nodded, a determined look on her face. Let's get to work, she said. With the device in Sarah's hand, they quickly got to work. Dr. Patel protested, but Emily and Jamie were resolute. They had to stop the rift, no matter what. Sarah explained that the temporal accelerator would allow them to speed up time itself, creating a localized distortion field around the rift. This would prevent it from opening fully, giving them more time to figure out how to close it for good. As they worked, Emily felt a strange sensation building inside her. She could feel the energy of the device pulsing through her veins, and she knew that this was going to be a wild ride. Jamie nodded at Sarah as she plugged in the last connection. "Ready?" he asked. Sarah nodded, and together they activated the device. A blinding light filled the room, and Emily felt herself being lifted out of her body. She saw the world around her distort and writhe, like a living thing being torn apart. The rift began to open, its edges glowing with an otherworldly energy. But the temporal accelerator was working, creating a localized distortion field that pushed against the rift's energy. Dr. Patel snarled in anger as he realized his plan was foiled. "You fools," he shouted. "You think you can stop me?" But Emily and Jamie just kept working, their hands moving swiftly as they fine-tuned the device. Sarah stood beside them, her eyes locked on the rift as it strained against the distortion field. The air was thick with tension as the battle between the rift's energy and the temporal accelerator raged on. Emily felt her body straining to keep up with the pace of events, but she refused to give in. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the rift began to close. The distortion field held strong, pushing against the rift's energy until it was forced back into its own dimension. As the light faded, Emily and Jamie collapsed onto the floor, exhausted but triumphant. Sarah smiled at them, a look of relief on her face. "We did it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Patel stood up, his eyes blazing with anger. "You may have won this battle," he spat, "but I'll be back. And next time you won't be so lucky." With that, he turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Emily and Jamie to catch their breath. As they sat there, trying to process what had just happened, Emily felt a strange sensation creeping over her. It was as if she was being pulled apart, her very identity unraveling like a thread pulled from a sweater. "What's happening?" she asked, feeling a sense of panic rising inside her. Sarah's eyes flickered to hers, and for a moment, Emily saw something there that made her blood run cold. "I think it's just the aftereffects of using the device," Sarah said quickly. "You'll be okay." But as Emily looked deeper into Sarah's eyes, she knew that this was no simple case of temporal fatigue. Something more was going on here, something that threatened to tear apart the very fabric of their reality. And in that moment, Emily realized that she had just scratched the surface of a much larger problem. As Emily struggled to make sense of what was happening, Jamie's voice cut through her thoughts. "Wait, what's going on?" he asked Sarah. "What are you hiding from us?" Sarah's expression turned guarded, and for a moment, Emily thought she saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" Sarah asked, trying to sound casual. But Jamie was onto something. He could see the tension in Sarah's body, the way her eyes darted back and forth as if searching for an escape route. "I'm talking about what just happened," Jamie said, his voice firm. "We stopped the rift, but at a cost. What did we unleash?" Sarah hesitated, and Emily knew that she was right to be suspicious. "Come on, Sarah," Ellie pressed. "Tell us the truth." Sarah took a deep breath, and her shoulders slumped in defeat. "I didn't want to tell you this," she said quietly. "But I think we've created a temporal paradox." Emily's mind reeled as she tried to process what Sarah was saying. "What do you mean?" Jamie asked, his voice laced with concern. Sarah explained the temporal accelerator had created a rift in the time stream, but it had also attracted attention from other dimensions. The energy released by the device had been so great that had created a resonance effect. drawing entities from other timelines into their own reality. Entities that were not human, Emily realized with a shiver. "We have to contain them," Sarah said, her voice urgent, "before they cause any more damage." But as she spoke, the air around them began to distort and writhe like a living thing. Emily felt a presence closing in on them, its energy pulsating with an otherworldly power. The entities were coming, and they were not alone. "Run!" Jamie shouted, grabbing Emily's hand as he pulled her towards the door. But it was too late. The entities had already breached the containment field, pouring into their reality like a flood of darkness. Emily felt herself being swept up in the tide, carried away from everything she knew and loved. She saw Jamie struggling to keep up with her, but even he was no match for the sheer power of the entities. As they disappeared into the swirling vortex of colors and lights, Emily realized that she had made a terrible mistake. The rift was still open, and the consequences of their actions were only just beginning to unfold. Emily's mind reeled as she was pulled through the vortex, her body stretched and distorted by the intense energy. She felt like she was being torn apart and put back together again, her very essence rearranged by the sheer power of the entities. When she finally emerged on the other side, Emily stumbled and fell to her knees, gasping for breath. Jamie was beside her, his face twisted with worry as he helped her up. What just happened?" Emily stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Jamie shook his head, his eyes scanning the surroundings as if searching for some explanation. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I think we're not in our world anymore." Emily's gaze followed Jamie's, and she saw that they were standing in a desolate landscape unlike anything she had ever seen. The sky above was a deep crimson, and the ground beneath their feet was dry and cracked. Sarah appeared beside them, her face pale but resolute. "We're on the surface of a temporal anomaly," she explained. "A rift in the fabric of space, time that's been opened by our actions." Emily felt a chill run down her spine as she took in the full implications of what Sarah was saying. "What are we going to do?" Jamie asked, his voice tight with anxiety. Sarah hesitated before speaking. "We need to find a way back home," she said. But I think it's not just about our getting back to our world. I think it's about finding a way to close the rift and prevent any more entities from coming through." Emily nodded, determination growing within her. She knew that they had to act quickly before the anomalies grew stronger and more unstable. But as she turned to look around them, Emily saw something that made her blood run cold. In the distance, she saw a figure walking towards them, a figure that looked uncannily like herself. It's me," Emily whispered, staring at the doppelganger in horror. Jamie and Sarah followed her gaze, their faces just as shocked as hers. "What does it mean?" Jamie asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah shook her head. "I don't know, but I think we're about to find out." As they watched, the doppelganger drew closer, its eyes locked on Emily's with an unnerving intensity. And in that moment, Emily knew that she was not alone anymore. The doppelganger approached them slowly, its eyes fixed intently on Emily. She felt a shiver run down her spine as it drew closer, its features mirroring her own with unnerving precision. "Who are you?" Emily asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The doppelganger didn't respond. Instead, it continued to walk towards them, its eyes never leaving Emily's face. "What do you want?" Jamie asked, his hand instinctively reaching for his pocket where he kept his phone. But as he looked down at the device in his hand, he realized with a jolt of panic that it was dead. The temporal anomaly had disrupted their communication devices, cutting them off from the rest of the world. Sarah stepped forward, her eyes locked on the doppelganger. "We don't know what you want," she said firmly, "but we're not going to let you harm us." The doppelganger stopped in front of Emily, its eyes still fixed intently on hers. For a moment, it simply stared at her, as if studying her very essence. Then, without warning, it reached out and touched Emily's face. A jolt of electricity ran through Emily's body, and she felt herself being pulled into the doppelganger's eyes. She saw visions flashing before her, scenes of a world that was familiar yet strange, filled with people who looked like her but were not quite the same. As the vision faded, Emily stumbled back, gasping for breath. The doppelganger stood back from her, its eyes still locked on hers with an unnerving intensity. It's me," Emily whispered, trying to process what she had just seen. "But it's not me." Sarah frowned. "What do you mean?" Emily took a deep breath, trying to gather her thoughts. "I saw visions of a world that's like our own, but different. People who look like us but are not quite the same." Jamie's eyes narrowed. "You think this doppelganger is from another timeline or something?" Sarah shook her head. "It's possible. The anomaly could be creating alternate versions of ourselves, trapped in their own loops of time." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine as she realized the implications. If what Sarah was saying was true, then they were not alone in this desolate world. And if they weren't alone, what do you want from me? Emily asked the doppelganger, her voice barely above a whisper. The doppelganger didn't respond, but instead reached out and touched Emily's face again. This time, Emily felt herself being pulled deeper into its eyes, further down a rabbit hole of visions and memories that threatened to consume her. As the doppelganger continued to touch Emily's face, she felt herself being pulled into a vortex of visions and memories. She saw herself living in different worlds, each one slightly different from the last. She saw versions of herself making different choices, taking different paths. But with each vision, Emily felt a growing sense of unease. Something was off about these alternate realities. They seemed darker somehow. And then, suddenly, Emily was back in her own body, gasping for breath as the doppelganger released its grip on her face. "What did you see?" Jamie asked, his voice tight with concern. Emily shook her head, trying to process what she had experienced. "I saw different versions of myself," she said slowly. "Different worlds, but something's off about them." Sarah frowned. "What do you mean?" Emily hesitated, unsure of how to explain what she had seen. "It's like they're trapped in some kind of loop," Emily said finally. "They keep reliving the same moments over and over, trying to get things right. But it doesn't matter. They'll never get out." The doppelganger took a step forward, its eyes locked intently on Emily's face. "It's me," Emily whispered, feeling a shiver run down her spine. "It's all of us, trapped in some kind of loop, reliving the same moments over and over." Sarah's eyes widened as she realized what Emily was saying. "You think this is some kind of temporal anomaly?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily nodded, feeling a sense of dread wash over her. "I think we're stuck here," Emily said slowly. "Trapped in this loop, forever reliving the same moments." As she spoke, the air around them seemed to grow colder, as if the very fabric of reality was beginning to unravel. "What do we do?" Jamie asked, his voice tight with fear. But before anyone could respond, the doppelganger reached out and touched Emily's face once more. And everything went black. When Emily came to, she was lying on the ground, her head throbbing with pain. She looked around, trying to get her bearings. Sarah and Jamie were standing over her, their faces pale with worry. "What happened?" Emily asked, struggling to sit up. But as she looked at her friends, Emily realized that something was off. They didn't look quite right. And then it hit her, the vision she had seen earlier, of a world where everything was slightly different. It wasn't just a world that was different, it was them. "We're not who we think we are," Emily whispered, feeling a sense of horror wash over her. Sarah and Jamie exchanged a worried glance. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily took a deep breath, trying to gather her thoughts. "I think we're trapped in some kind of loop," Emily said slowly. And it's not just us. It's everyone. As she spoke, the air around them seemed to grow colder, as if the very fabric of reality was beginning to unravel. And then everything went black once more. Chapter 3. The Loop. When Emily came to, she found herself back in the desolate landscape, surrounded by Sarah and Jamie. But this time something was different. The doppelganger was standing beside them, its eyes fixed intently on Emily's face. "You're not who you think you are," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah and Jamie exchanged a confused glance. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with worry. Emily hesitated, unsure of how to explain what she had seen. "I saw visions of different worlds," Emily said slowly. "Different versions of ourselves, trapped in some kind of loop." Oh, Jamie frowned. "What loop?" Emily took a deep breath, trying to gather her thoughts. "We're stuck in this temporal anomaly," Emily said finally. "Trapped in a loop of time, reliving the same moments over and over." Sarah's eyes widened as she realized what Emily was saying. "You think we're trapped in some kind of predestination?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily nodded, feeling a sense of dread wash over her. "I think so," Emily said slowly. "And I think it's not just us. It's everyone." As she spoke, the air around them seemed to grow colder, as if the very fabric of reality was beginning to unravel. The doppelganger took a step forward, its eyes locked intently on Emily's face. "You're trying to tell me something," Emily said slowly. "But I'm not sure what." Sarah and Jamie exchanged a worried glance. "What do we do?" Jamie asked, his voice tight with fear. Emily hesitated, unsure of the answer. "We have to find a way out of this loop," Emily said finally, "before it's too late." As she spoke, the doppelganger reached out and touched Emily's face once more. And everything went black. When Emily came to again, she found herself back in her own world, standing in front of the coffee shop where they had first met. Sarah and Jamie were beside her, their faces pale with worry. "What happened?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily hesitated, trying to gather her thoughts. "I think we're stuck in this loop," Emily said slowly. "Trapped in some kind of predestination." Jamie frowned. "But how do we escape it?" Emily took a deep breath, trying to come up with an answer. "We have to find the source of the anomaly," Emily said finally, "and fix it before it's too late." As she spoke, a figure emerged from the shadows, its eyes fixed intently on Emily's face. The doppelganger was standing in front of them, its eyes locked intently on Emily's face. "You're getting close to the truth," the doppelganger said slowly. "But are you ready for it?" Emily felt a shiver run down her spine as she realized what the doppelganger was saying. "We're not who we think we are," Emily whispered, feeling a sense of horror wash over her. The doppelganger smiled, its eyes glinting with amusement. "You'll find out soon enough," the doppelganger said slowly. "But for now, let's just say that you're running out of time." And with that, everything went black once more. Emily's eyes fluttered open to find herself back in the desolate landscape, surrounded by Sarah and Jamie. But this time, something was different. The doppelganger was standing beside them, its eyes fixed intently on Emily's face. "You're not who you think you are," Emily said again, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah and Jamie exchanged a confused glance. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked once more. Emily hesitated, unsure of how to explain what she had seen. "I've been having visions of different worlds," Emily said slowly. "Different versions of ourselves, trapped in some kind of loop." "Paul," Jamie frowned. "What loop?" Emily took a deep breath, trying to gather her thoughts. "We're stuck in this temporal anomaly," Emily said finally. "Trapped in a loop of time, reliving the same moments over and over." "Bah." Sarah's eyes widened as she realized what Emily was saying. "You think we're trapped in some kind of predestination?" Sarah asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily nodded, feeling a sense of dread wash over her. "I think so," Emily said slowly. And I think it's not just us. It's everyone. As she spoke, the air around them seemed to grow colder, as if the very fabric of reality was beginning to unravel. The doppelganger took a step forward, its eyes locked intently on Emily's face. "You're trying to tell me something," Emily said slowly. "But I'm not sure what." Sarah and Jamie exchanged a worried glance. "What do we do?" Jamie asked once more, his voice tight with fear. Emily hesitated, unsure of the answer. "We have to find a way out of this loop," Emily said finally. "Before it's too late." As she spoke, the doppelganger reached out and touched Emily's face once more. And everything went black again. When Emily came to, she found herself back in her own world, standing in front of the coffee shop where they had first met. But this time, something was different. The coffee shop was empty, and the streets were deserted. Sarah and Jamie were beside her, their faces pale with worry. "What happened?" Sarah asked once more, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily hesitated, trying to gather her thoughts. "I think we're stuck in this loop," Emily said slowly. "Trapped in some kind of predestination." Bah. Jamie frowned. "But how do we escape it?" Emily took a deep breath, trying to come up with an answer. "We have to find the source of the anomaly," Emily said finally, "and fix it before it's too late." As she spoke, a figure emerged from the shadows, its eyes fixed intently on Emily's face. It was a woman dressed in a long coat and sunglasses. She looked familiar, but Emily couldn't quite place her. "Who are you?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman smiled, her eyes glinting with amusement. "I'm someone who knows the truth," she said slowly, "and I'm here to help you." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine as she realized what the woman was saying. "Who are you?" Emily asked again, her voice louder this time. The woman smiled once more. "My name is Dr. Rachel Kim," she said slowly, "and I'm the one who created this temporal anomaly." As she spoke, the world around them began to distort and blur, as if reality itself was beginning to unravel. "We have to talk," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Kim nodded, her eyes locked intently on Emily's face. "Yes," she said slowly, "we do." Dr. Kim led them to a small cafe in the heart of the city, away from prying eyes and ears. They sat down at a table, surrounded by the quiet hum of espresso machines and the soft chatter of patrons. "So, you're the one who created this temporal anomaly," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Kim nodded, her eyes locked intently on Emily's face. "Wes," she said slowly, "I did, and I'm here to explain why." Sarah and Jamie exchanged a confused glance. Sarah asked, her voice tight with worry. Dr. Kim took a deep breath, as if gathering her thoughts. "I was trying to create a new form of temporal mechanics," Dr. Kim explained. "A way to manipulate time itself, to bend it to our will." Jamie frowned. "But how did you do that?" Dr. Kim smiled wryly. "I used something called a quantum singularity. A tiny point in space, time where the laws of physics are distorted beyond recognition." Emily's eyes widened as she realized what Dr. Kim was saying. "You created a wormhole," Emily said slowly. "A shortcut through time itself." Dr. Kim nodded, her eyes glinting with pride. "Yes, and it worked, but there were unforeseen consequences." Sarah's voice was tight with fear. "What kind of consequences?" Dr. Kim hesitated, as if unsure of how to explain. "The anomaly started to feed on itself," Dr. Kim said slowly, "creating new timelines and realities, all trapped in this loop of time." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine as she realized the true extent of what Dr. Kim had created. "And we're stuck in one of those timelines," Emily said slowly. Dr. Kim nodded, her eyes locked intently on Emily's face. "Yes, and I'm here to help you escape it." Sarah and Jamie exchanged a skeptical glance. "How?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with doubt. Dr. Kim smiled wryly. "I have a plan," she said slowly. "But we need to move quickly. The anomaly is growing stronger by the minute." As Dr. Kim spoke, the world around them began to distort and blur once more, as if reality itself was beginning to unravel. We don't have much time, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Kim nodded, her eyes locked intently on Emily's face. No, we don't. And with that, the cafe seemed to disappear around them, replaced by a swirling vortex of colors and lights. Emily felt herself being pulled towards it, as if sucked into a whirlpool of time itself. We have to go, Dr. Kim said, her voice barely above a whisper. Where? Sarah asked, her voice tight with fear. Dr. Kim smiled wryly. To the source of the anomaly, she said slowly. The only way to stop it is to destroy it. As Emily spoke, the world around them began to distort and blur once more, as if reality itself was beginning to unravel. And then, everything went black. When Emily came to, she found herself in a desolate landscape, surrounded by an endless expanse of gray sand and twisted metal ruins. Dr. Kim was standing beside her, her eyes fixed intently on the horizon. Welcome to the temporal nexus, Dr. Kim said slowly. The heart of the anomaly. Sarah and Jamie were stumbling towards them, their faces pale with fear. What is this place? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Kim smiled wryly. The temporal nexus is a nexus point in space-time, she explained. A convergence of multiple timelines and realities all trapped in this loop. Emily's eyes widened as she realized the true extent of what Dr. Kim had created. And we're here to destroy it, Emily asked slowly. Dr. Kim nodded, her eyes locked intently on Emily's face. Yes, the only way to stop the anomaly is to destroy its source. And that source is here. As Dr. Kim spoke, a figure emerged from the shadows, its eyes fixed intently on Emily's face. It was the doppelganger, its face twisted in a snarl of rage and fear. You fools, the doppelganger spat, its voice like a rusty gate. You think you can destroy it. You'll never succeed. Dr. Kim smiled wryly. We'll see about that, she said slowly. And with that, the group set off towards the heart of the anomaly, pursued by an army of duplicates and alternate versions of themselves. As they walked, Emily realized that they were not alone in this desolate landscape. There were others here, trapped in their own loops of time, searching for a way out. Emily saw a young girl, no more than 10 years old, walking towards them with a determined look on her face. Behind her came an elderly woman, her eyes fixed intently on the horizon. Sarah and Jamie exchanged a worried glance. What's going on? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Duh, Kim smiled wryly. The anomaly is creating duplicates of itself, she explained. Echoes of our own timelines, trapped in this loop, bah. As Emily spoke, the group stumbled upon a massive structure rising out of the sand, its walls pulsating with energy and color. What's that? Jamie asked, his voice tight with fear. Dr. Kim smiled wryly. That's the heart of the anomaly, she said slowly. The source of it all. And with that, the group set off towards the heart of the anomaly, ready to face whatever lay ahead. But as they walked, Emily realized that something was wrong. The duplicates were getting stronger, their presence growing more intense. And then Emily saw her, a figure walking towards them from the shadows, her eyes fixed intently on Emily's face. What's going on? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Kim smiled wryly. The anomaly is creating echoes of ourselves, she explained, duplicates trapped in their own loops of time. As Emily spoke, the group stumbled upon a massive door rising out of the sand, its surface pulsating with energy and color. What's that? Jamie asked, his voice tight with fear. Dr. Kim smiled wryly. That's the entrance to the heart, she said slowly. Are you ready? And with that, the group steeled themselves for what lay ahead, ready to face whatever dangers awaited them in the heart of the anomaly. Ask, explained Emily's duplicate approached her, its eyes fixed intently on Emily's face. I'm you, it said slowly, its voice identical to Emily's own. Dr. Kim smiled wryly. Wes, you're one of the echoes trapped in this loop. Sarah and Jamie exchanged a confused glance. What do we do? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Kim nodded towards the massive door. We go through it, she said slowly. We have to stop the anomaly at its source. Emily's duplicate stepped closer, its eyes locked intently on Emily's face. Wait, it said slowly. Don't you remember? Emily frowned, her mind racing with confusion. Remember what? She asked slowly. Her duplicate smiled wryly. We've been here before, it said slowly. We've tried to stop the anomaly before, but every time, it gets stronger. Dr. Kim nodded, her eyes locked intently on Emily's face. That's because we're stuck in a loop of time, she explained. A loop that's getting tighter and tighter with each passing moment. Sarah and Jamie exchanged a terrified glance. What do we do? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Kim smiled wryly. We break the cycle, she said slowly. We have to find a way out of this loop before it's too late. And with that, the group steeled themselves for what lay ahead, ready to face whatever dangers awaited them in the heart of the anomaly. As they approached the massive door, Emily's duplicate fell back, its eyes fixed intently on Emily's face. Be careful, it said slowly. The heart is not what you think it is. Dr. Kim smiled wryly. We'll be fine, she said slowly. We have to try. And with that, the group pushed through the massive door, ready to face whatever lay ahead. As they stepped into the heart of the anomaly, Emily felt a strange sensation wash over her. It was as if time itself was bending and warping around her, making it hard to breathe. Dr. Kim smiled wryly. We're in now, she said slowly. Let's see what we can find. And with that, the group began to explore the heart of the anomaly, ready to face whatever dangers awaited them. But as they delved deeper into the anomaly, Emily realized that something was wrong. The duplicates were getting stronger, their presence growing more intense, and then Emily saw it. A massive structure rising out of the sand, its walls pulsating with energy and color. What's that? Jamie asked, his voice tight with fear. Dar, Kim smiled wryly. That's the source of the anomaly, she said slowly. The heart itself. As Emily spoke, a figure emerged from the shadows, its eyes fixed intently on Emily's face. It was the mastermind behind the anomaly, the one who had created it in the first place. Welcome, it said slowly. I've been waiting for you. And with that, the group steeled themselves for what lay ahead, ready to face whatever dangers awaited them in the heart of the anomaly. The mastermind stepped forward, its eyes gleaming with intensity. I am the architect, it said slowly, and I have been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Dr. Kim smiled wryly. We're here to stop you, she said slowly. The architect laughed, its voice echoing through the heart of the anomaly. You fools, it said slowly. You think you can stop me? I am the one who has created this loop of time, and I have designed it to be impossible to escape. Emily's duplicate stepped forward, its eyes locked intently on Emily's face. I remember, it said slowly. We've been here before. We've tried to stop you before. But every time, it gets stronger. The architect smiled wryly. Yes, it said slowly. You are correct. You have tried to stop me before, and each time I have adapted and improved my design. And now, with this latest iteration of the loop, I am ready for anything you can throw at me. Dr. Kim nodded, her eyes locked intently on the architect's face. We won't let you win, she said slowly. The architect laughed again, its voice echoing through the heart of the anomaly. You'll never leave this place, it said slowly. This is your home now, and I will continue to create duplicates of yourself, trapping you in an endless loop of time. As the architect spoke, Emily realized that something was wrong. The duplicates were getting stronger, their presence growing more intense. And then Emily saw it, a figure emerging from the shadows, its eyes fixed intently on Emily's face. It was herself. No, Emily said slowly. This can't be happening. Her duplicate smiled wryly. You're not who you think you are, it said slowly. You're a creation of the anomaly, designed to keep you trapped in this loop forever. But Dr. Kim stepped forward, her eyes locked intently on Emily's face. We have to get out of here, she said slowly. We can't let you become a part of this anomaly. But it was too late. The architect smiled wryly. You see, I have created a new iteration of the loop, it said slowly. One that includes all of your duplicates. And soon there will be no way to escape. As the architect spoke, Emily felt her mind begin to fragment, her memories and thoughts becoming jumbled and confused. And then everything went black. Epilogue: Emily woke up in a cold, dark room, her head pounding with pain. She was lying on a hospital bed, surrounded by doctors and nurses who were staring at her with concerned expressions. Dr. Kim's face appeared above hers, her eyes locked intently on Emily's face. Welcome back, she said slowly. You've been asleep for a long time. Emily sat up, trying to remember what had happened. What happened? She asked slowly. Dr. Kim smiled wryly. You were part of the anomaly, she said slowly. But don't worry, you're safe now. You're out of the loop. Emily looked around the room, trying to take it all in. She saw Jamie and Sarah sitting in chairs, their faces pale with fear. And then Emily remembered the duplicates, the ones who were trapped in the anomaly forever. She felt a wave of guilt wash over her, mixed with anger at the architect and its creation. I want out, she said slowly. I want to escape. Dr. Kim smiled wryly. I'm afraid that's not possible, she said slowly. The loop is too strong. But don't worry, you're safe now. You'll never have to go back there again. Chapter 60. The Escape. Emily sat up in bed, her eyes fixed intently on Dr. Kim's face. I'm not giving up, she said slowly. I want to find a way out of the loop. There. Kim sighed, her expression sympathetic. I understand your desire to escape, Emily, but I have to be honest with you, the loop is too powerful. We've tried everything we can think of, but nothing seems to work. Emily shook her head, determination etched on her face. That's not good enough, she said slowly. I'll find a way out, no matter what it takes. Dr. Kim smiled wryly. I admire your spirit, Emily, but I have to warn you, the architect is getting stronger by the day. We don't find a way to stop it soon, it will be too late. But Emily nodded, her eyes locked intently on Dr. Kim's face. I understand, she said slowly, but I'm not giving up yet. Can you at least tell me more about the loop? Dr. Kim hesitated for a moment before speaking. The loop is a temporal anomaly, she said slowly. It's created when two or more timelines intersect, causing a feedback loop that becomes self-sustaining. Emily frowned, trying to understand. So it's like a giant echo chamber? She asked slowly. Dr. Kim nodded. Exactly, and the architect is the one who has been manipulating it, creating duplicates of yourself and trapping them in the loop forever. Emily's eyes widened as understanding dawned on her. That's why I had all those memories, she said slowly. They were just echoes from other timelines. Doc. Kim nodded again. Yes. And if we don't find a way to stop it soon, you'll become trapped in that echo chamber for eternity. Emily's face set in determination. I won't let that happen, she said slowly. I'll find a way out of this loop, no matter what it takes. Chapter 7. The memory. Emily sat up in bed again, her eyes scanning the room as if searching for something. What is it? Dr. Kim asked, noticing Emily's expression. I had a memory, Emily said slowly. A memory from before I was trapped in the loop. Dr. Kim leaned forward, intrigued. Tell me about it, she said slowly. Emily closed her eyes, trying to recall the details of the memory. It was like I was walking through a forest, she said slowly. And I saw something in the distance, a massive structure that seemed to be pulsing with energy. Dr. Kim's eyes widened as understanding dawned on her. That sounds like the source of the loop, she said slowly. The architect has been using it to amplify the feedback, creating more and more duplicates. Emily nodded, her face set in determination. I have to find that structure, she said slowly. I have to stop the architect once and for all. Dr. Kim smiled wryly. Are you sure you're ready for this? She asked slowly. Emily's eyes locked intently on Dr. Kim's face. "I was born for this," she said slowly. The team quickly got to work, setting up the equipment needed to create the rift in the timeline. Emily sat down in the center of the room, surrounded by her duplicates. "We're going to do this," she said slowly, looking at each of them. "We're going to break the loop and free ourselves from the architect's control." Dr. Kim nodded, a look of approval on her face. "Remember, Emily, once you're through the rift, you'll be sent back into your own timeline. You'll have to find a way to stop the architect and prevent this loop from happening again." Emily nodded, her eyes locked intently on Dr. Kim's face. "I understand," she said slowly. "Let's do this." The team counted down together, and with a burst of energy, the rift opened up in front of Emily. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and stepped through it. As she emerged on the other side, Emily felt a strange sensation wash over her. She looked around, taking in her surroundings. She was standing in a forest, surrounded by tall trees that seemed to stretch up to the sky. Suddenly, a figure appeared before her. It was an older version of herself, one who looked like she had lived through countless battles against the architect. "Welcome," the older Emily said slowly. "I've been waiting for you." Emily's eyes widened as she took in the sight of her future self. What is this place?" she asked slowly. The older Emily smiled wryly. "This is a timeline that exists outside of the loop," she explained. "A timeline where we were able to stop the architect and prevent this loop from happening again." But Emily's eyes lit up with hope as she looked at her future self. "Tell me more," she said slowly. The older Emily nodded, beginning to explain the intricacies of the timeline and how they had been able to stop the architect. But just as she was getting to the good part, a loud explosion rocked the forest, sending both Emilys stumbling backwards. "What's happening?" Emily asked slowly, looking around in alarm. The older Emily's face turned grim. "Seems we have some unwanted visitors," she said quickly. "The architect's duplicates have followed you through the rift." Emily's eyes widened as she looked at her future self. "We need to get out of here," she said slowly. But it was too late. The duplicates had already surrounded them, their cold, calculating eyes fixed on Emily and her future self. "It seems we're in a bit of trouble," the older Emily said wryly. Emily nodded, her face set in determination. "We'll figure something out," she said slowly. But as they looked at each other, Emily realized that this was going to be a lot harder than she had anticipated. The duplicates closed in on Emily and her future self, their movements eerily synchronized. "We need to split up," the older Emily said quickly. "We can't take them all on at once." Emily nodded, a plan forming in her mind. "I'll create a diversion," she said slowly. "You take out as many of them as you can, and then meet me back here." The older Emily nodded, a look of understanding on her face. "Go!" she shouted, charging forward into the fray. Emily took off in the opposite direction, using her knowledge of the forest to evade the duplicates' attacks. She ducked behind a tree, watching as the duplicates closed in on her future self. But just as they were about to overwhelm her, Emily's future self unleashed a powerful blast of energy that sent the duplicates flying. "Not bad," Emily said slowly, impressed by her future self's skills. Her future self grinned, winking at her. "Thanks for the vote of confidence," she said quickly. "Now let's get out of here." The two Emilys made their way through the forest, dodging and weaving between the duplicates' attacks. They finally reached a small clearing where a sleek black vehicle was waiting for them. "This is our ride," Emily said slowly, nodding at her future self. Her future self smiled, unlocking the doors of the vehicle. "Get in," she said quickly. "We've got to get out of here before more duplicates show up." Emily slid into the passenger seat, looking back as her future self peeled out of the clearing. They sped through the forest, dodging trees and leaping over obstacles with ease. As they emerged from the forest, Emily caught a glimpse of the city in the distance. It was a sprawling metropolis, with towering skyscrapers and neon lights illuminating the night sky. "Where are we going?" Emily asked slowly, looking at her future self in alarm. Her future self grinned, glancing back at her. "We're going to meet up with some old friends," she said quickly. "Friends who can help us take down the architect once and for all." Emily's eyes widened as she looked out the window, taking in the sights of the city. She had a feeling that this was just the beginning of their adventure. But little did they know, the architect was already one step ahead of them. As they drove through the city, Emily's future self expertly navigated the streets, avoiding traffic and security patrols with ease. "We're close," she said quickly, glancing at her watch. "We'll be there in a few minutes." Emily nodded, taking in the sights of the city. She had never seen anything like it before. "What is this place?" she asked slowly. Her future self smiled wryly. "This is New Eden," she explained, "a city built by people who escaped the loop. It's a safe haven for those who want to break free from the architect's control." But Emily's eyes widened in amazement as they pulled up to a sleek, high-rise building. "Welcome to our humble abode," her future self said quickly. Unlocking the doors, they stepped out of the vehicle and into the building, where a group of people were waiting for them. They were all dressed in similar attire, with a mix of futuristic gadgets and makeshift armor on display. "This is the Resistance," Emily's future self explained. "A group of individuals who have dedicated themselves to taking down the architect and freeing humanity from its grasp." Emily's eyes scanned the room, taking in the faces of the people gathered there. She saw determination, courage, and a deep-seated desire for freedom. "What can we do to help?" she asked slowly, looking at her future self. Her future self smiled, nodding at the leader of the Resistance, a woman named Maya. "Maya will fill you in on the plan," she said quickly. "But first, let's get you settled in." Emily nodded, following her future self and Maya to a secure room deep within the building. As they entered the room, Emily saw a large screen displaying a map of the city. Maya began explaining their plan, using holographic projections to illustrate their strategy. "The architect has set up a series of checkpoints around the city," she explained. "We need to take them down one by one if we're going to make it out alive." Emily listened intently, her mind racing with ideas and questions. She knew that this was just the beginning of their journey, but she was ready for whatever came next. But as they were discussing their plan, a sudden alert went off on the screen. A message flashed across the room, echoing through the speakers. "Attention, Resistance," it said. "We have been compromised. The architect has found our hideout and is sending troops to capture us." Emily's heart sank as she looked at her future self and Maya. They exchanged a grim glance, knowing that their time was running out. The room erupted into chaos as the Resistance scrambled to respond to the alert. Emily's future self quickly sprang into action, grabbing Emily and pulling her towards the exit. "We have to get out of here," she shouted above the din. "Now!" Maya nodded in agreement, already leading a team of Resistance fighters out of the room. "Follow me," she yelled as they sprinted down the hallway. Emily's future self kept pace with Maya, expertly navigating the twisting corridors of the building. They burst through a set of doors and into a hidden alleyway behind the high rise. A sleek black van was waiting for them, its engine roaring to life as Emily's future self tossed her inside. "Get in!" she yelled, leaping in beside Emily as Maya climbed into the driver's seat. The van screeched out of the alleyway, waving through the crowded streets as they desperately sought to escape the architect's troops. Emily clung to the doorframe, her heart racing with fear. She had never felt so alive, yet so terrified at the same time. "We have to get out of the city," Maya said grimly, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "The architect will stop at nothing to capture us." Emily's future self nodded in agreement, her face set in determination. "I know a place where we can hide," she said quickly. "A secret location that only a handful of people know about." But Maya's eyes narrowed as she took a sharp turn, the van's tires screeching on the pavement. "Tell me more," she said curtly. Emily's future self leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It's an old research facility on the outskirts of the city," she explained. "A place where scientists once worked on top, secret projects before the architect took over, Maya nodded thoughtfully, her eyes never leaving the road ahead. "Sounds like our best bet," she said finally. "But we have to move fast. The architect's troops will be closing in soon." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine as they hurtled through the streets, the city blurring by in a chaotic blur of lights and sounds. She knew that their time was running out. They had to reach the research facility before the architect's forces overran them. Chapter 7: The Research Facility. The van screeched around another corner, narrowly avoiding a group of soldiers who were hot on their heels. "Almost there," Maya said grimly, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. Emily's future self peered out the window, her eyes scanning the rooftops for any sign of danger. They turned onto a narrow side street, and suddenly the city gave way to a sprawling industrial complex. The van sped past rows of abandoned warehouses and factories, finally coming to a stop in front of an old research facility. The building loomed above them, its walls cracked and worn from years of disuse. "This is it," Emily's future self said quickly, grabbing the door handle. Maya nodded, leaping out of the van with Emily's future self. Emily followed close behind, her heart pounding in her chest as they sprinted towards the entrance. The building was dark and musty inside, but Emily's future self led them through the corridors with ease. They reached a large elevator, which Maya quickly programmed to take them to the top floor. As the doors slid open, Emily saw a figure waiting for them. It was an older man with a kind face and a hint of recognition in his eyes. "Welcome," he said warmly, nodding at each of them in turn. "I've been expecting you." Emily's future self smiled, clapping the old man on the back. "This is Dr. Kim," she explained. "He used to work here before the architect took over." Dr. Kim nodded, his eyes serious. "I have something that can help you," he said quietly. "Something that will give us a chance to take down the architect once and for all." But Emily's heart skipped a beat as Dr. Kim led them into a small laboratory. On a table in the center of the room was a strange device humming with energy. "What is it?" Emily asked slowly, her eyes fixed on the device. Dr. Kim smiled grimly. "It's a temporal disruptor," he explained. "Something that can break the architect's hold on time itself." But Emily's future self stepped forward, her eyes shining with excitement. "This could be our chance to change the course of history," she said quietly. But just as they were about to discuss their plan further, Emily heard a faint rumbling noise coming from outside. It was the sound of soldiers closing in on the research facility. Emily's heart sank as she looked out the window. A platoon of soldiers had surrounded the building, their guns at the ready. "We have to act fast," Maya said grimly, grabbing Dr. Kim's arm. Dr. Kim nodded, his eyes darting around the room. "I can activate the disruptor," he said quickly, "but it will require a lot of power." Emily's future self stepped forward, her face set in determination. "We don't have time to worry about that now," she said firmly. "We have to get this device working and get out of here fast." "Sure." Kim nodded, frantically typing away on a computer terminal. "Almost there," he muttered, his eyes scanning the data streaming across the screen. The soldiers outside were closing in, their voices shouting orders at each other as they tried to break down the door. Emily felt a surge of fear as she realized how close they were to being caught, but her future self just gave her a reassuring smile and a nod. "We're almost there," she said quietly. "Just hold on." Dr. Kim finally managed to activate the disruptor, and it roared to life with a blinding flash of light. The device emitted a high, pitched whine that sent shivers down Emily's spine. She covered her ears as the sound grew louder and more intense. Suddenly, the walls around them began to ripple and distort, like water on the surface of a pond. "What's happening?" Emily asked, her voice barely audible over the din. "It's the temporal field," Dr. Kim explained rapidly. "The device is creating a localized distortion in time itself." Emily watched in awe as the soldiers outside began to stumble and stagger, as if they were walking through quicksand. "The architect's control is weakening," Maya said grimly. "We have our chance." But just as they were about to make their move, Emily saw something that made her heart skip a beat. A figure emerged from the swirling temporal field, its eyes fixed intently on them. The figure stepped out of the temporal field, its presence causing the distortions to stabilize and then fade away. As the light died down, Emily saw a person she had never seen before. They were tall, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. "Who are you?" Maya asked quickly, hand on the grip of her gun. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it took a step closer, its eyes fixed intently on Emily's future self. It's him," Dr. Kim whispered, his voice trembling with fear. Emily's future self took a step back, her face pale. "No," she said quietly. "It can't be." The figure continued to approach, its movements slow and deliberate. Suddenly, it spoke in a low, rumbling voice that sent shivers down Emily's spine. "I have been waiting for you," it said, its eyes fixed intently on Emily's future self. Emily's heart was racing now. Who was this person? And what did they want? Maya took a step forward, gun raised. "Who are you?" she repeated, her voice firm. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it kept moving closer, its eyes never leaving Emily's future self. As the distance between them closed, Emily saw something that made her blood run cold. A glimmer of recognition in Emily's future self's eyes, a spark of connection that seemed to transcend time and space itself. The figure reached out a hand, its fingers brushing against Emily's future self's face. And in that moment everything changed. Emily's future self didn't pull away. Instead, she seemed to lean into the touch, her eyes closing as if savoring a long, lost memory. The figure's hand lingered on her face for what felt like an eternity, and then it stepped back, its eyes still fixed intently on Emily's future self. "I remember you," Emily's future self said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure nodded, a small smile playing on its lips. "I have been waiting for this moment for a long time," it said. Dr. Kim took a step forward, his eyes wide with fear. "Who are you?" he repeated. "What do you want?" The figure's gaze flicked to Dr. Kim, and then back to Emily's future self. "I am the key to unlocking the secrets of this world," it said, "and I have come to take my rightful place alongside you." Emily's future self took a step forward, her eyes shining with a mixture of fear and excitement. You're me?" she stammered. The figure nodded, its smile growing wider. "I am the one who has been waiting for this moment," it said. "I am the one who will help you change the course of history." Maya took a step forward, her gun raised. "We don't know anything about you," she said quickly. "You're not going anywhere until we get some answers." The figure's smile never wavered. It reached out and touched Emily's future self's face again, and this time, something strange happened. Emily's future self began to glow with a soft, blue light. "What's happening?" Dr. Kim asked, his voice trembling with fear. It's her memories," Emily's future self said quietly. "They're merging with mine." The light grew brighter, illuminating the dark corners of the room and casting an otherworldly glow over everything. As they watched, Emily's future self began to transform, her eyes changing color, her hair growing longer. And in that moment, Emily realized something profound. This figure was not just a stranger. It was a part of herself, a fragment of her own soul that had been torn apart by time and space. As the light grew brighter, Emily's future self began to shift and change, her body adapting to accommodate this new presence. Dr. Kim took a step back, his eyes wide with wonder. "What's happening?" he whispered. She's merging with herself." Maya watched in awe as Emily's future self continued to transform, her eyes now shining with an inner light that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. "This is impossible," Maya breathed. "It can't be." But it was, and as they watched, Emily's future self finally took on a new form, one that blended the best of both worlds, the wisdom and experience of her older self, combined with the vitality and passion of her younger self. The figure stood before them now, its eyes shining with a deep understanding, its presence radiating an aura of power and authority. "I am you," it said quietly, "and I have come to help you change the course of history." Emily's heart swelled with emotion as she gazed at this new version of herself. "How is this possible?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure smiled, its eyes crinkling at the corners. "Time is not what we think it is," it said. "It is a river that flows in both directions, and I have come to show you how to navigate its currents." As they spoke, Emily felt her mind expanding, her perception of time and space shifting in ways she could hardly comprehend. "This is crazy," Maya said, her voice shaking with excitement. "But it makes sense. It has to make sense." Dr. Kim nodded, his eyes shining with a mixture of awe and trepidation. "We have to be careful," he warned. "We don't know what kind of power we're playing with here." The figure nodded in agreement, its presence radiating an aura of caution. "Wes," it said quietly, "but we also have the chance to change everything, to rewrite the course of history and create a new future." And as they stood there, poised on the brink of this incredible journey, Emily knew that she had no choice but to take the leap, to trust in herself and in this strange and wondrous version of her own soul. With a deep breath, Emily nodded, committing herself to this incredible journey. "I'm ready," she said quietly. "Let's do it." The figure smiled, its eyes shining with approval. "Then let us begin," it said. "Together, we will rewrite the course of history and create a new future." As they spoke, the room around them began to shift and change, the walls dissolving into a swirling vortex of color and light. Emily felt herself being pulled through this vortex, her senses reeling as she struggled to keep up with the incredible pace of events. She saw flashes of distant memories, echoes of events that had yet to come. She saw herself standing on mountaintops, gazing out at vistas of breathtaking beauty. She saw herself walking hand in hand with loved ones, laughing and smiling together. And through it all, she felt a sense of peace and clarity that she had never known before. This was the power of time itself, flowing through her like a river. And as she let go of her fears and doubts, she began to feel the thrill of possibility, the rush of creation that came with every new moment. "Whoa!" Maya breathed, stumbling backwards as the vortex dissipated. What just happened? Dr. Kim looked around in confusion, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for some hidden clue. "I don't know," he muttered. "But I think we've been changed." Emily nodded, her heart still soaring with the thrill of the unknown. "We have," she said quietly. "We're not the same people anymore. We're different." The figure stood before them now, its presence radiating an aura of calm and serenity. "You are now part of a larger timeline," it said gently. "A timeline that stretches out into infinity, filled with endless possibilities and endless choices." As they listened in awe, Emily felt her mind expanding, her perception of the world shifting to encompass this vast new landscape. "We're not just individuals anymore," she said quietly. "We're part of something bigger, something infinite." Ah. The figure nodded in agreement, its eyes shining with a deep understanding. "Yes," it said quietly. "And together we will shape that future, creating a reality that is beyond our wildest dreams. As the figure finished speaking, Emily felt a sense of calm wash over her. She knew that she had been forever changed by this experience and that nothing would ever be the same again. Maya and Doc Kim looked at each other in shock, their eyes wide with wonder. What just happened? Maya asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Kim shook his head, his mind reeling from the implications of what they had seen. I don't know, he muttered, but I think we've stumbled into something much bigger than ourselves. The figure nodded in agreement, its presence radiating an aura of calm and serenity. You have indeed, it said quietly. And now, you must decide how to use this knowledge. Emily felt a surge of determination rise up within her. She knew that she had been given a great gift, and that she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. I know what I want to do, she said quietly. I want to help others see the truth about time and space. I want to show them that there's so much more to life than just living in the present. The figure nodded its head in approval, a small smile playing on its lips. Then let us begin, it said quietly. Together, we will change the world. As Emily finished speaking, the room around her began to dissolve into nothingness. She felt herself being pulled back through time and space, returning to the present moment with a newfound sense of purpose and determination. She opened her eyes to find Maya and Dr. Kim staring at her in awe, their faces filled with wonder and curiosity. What just happened? Maya asked once more, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily smiled, feeling a sense of peace and clarity that she had never known before. I think we've been given a great gift, she said quietly. A chance to see the truth about time and space, and to change the world. As she spoke, the room around them began to fade away, leaving only the three of them standing alone in the silence. And in that moment, Emily knew that nothing would ever be the same again.